in England and Wales, there is no legal definition of a common law husband or wife. It simply doesn't exist. In some jurisdictions, you can get rights against the other person's property after you've lived with them for a certain amount of time, but that's not a right which exists in the UK, and it is a very common misconception. If you move in with somebody, it's really advisable at the start of moving in with them that everybody's very clear as to what the living arrangements will be. Sometimes cohabitants, people moving in with their partners, may decide to buy a house together. It's important then that when you do buy a house, both of you understand and have paperwork drawn up as to who owns this house and who's paying the mortgage. And the starting point is when you purchase the house is to fill out the transfer deed. It will ask you, do you want to own it in your own name or as joint tenants, which means both of you own all of the house, and if one of you dies, the other automatically inherits the other half. Or do you want to own it as tenants in common, whereby you can own it on a percentage basis? So say if one of you put in 70% of the deposit, you can put in there possibly that the ownership isn't 50-50. Going forward from that, you might also want to have a declaration of trust. So for example, if somebody did put in more than the other person as the deposit, you can reflect what the purchase price is, what the mortgage was, and what the contributions were, and then who's going to be paying the mortgage and what percentage that would be. If you move in with your partner and their property is owned in their sole name, that property is their property in their sole name. Just because you've lived in there for 10 years, it doesn't give you an automatic right to the share in the property. There are ways in which you can develop a right to somebody's property. For example, if you pay for, the most common being, if you paid for a large extension, or it was specifically agreed between you that you were contributing towards the mortgage, not just bills and things, but it was very clear that can also mean that you can develop a right. So from both parties' points of view, it's very important that you're clear what your intentions are when you move in with somebody. Even if you have children with that person and that property is still in their name and you just live there, that still won't give you a right to it. A cohabitation agreement can set out far more detail than the transfer deed on the conveyance or declaration of trust. So it's the agreement which governs the sort of day-to-day living between the parties, and it can cover things like payments of bills, childcare costs, what happens if one of you becomes ill and can't work, mortgage payments, what happens if you split up. You can allow the other person time to move out the house. So what the trigger events are for then resolving the issue about the house. So it's essentially a contract between the parties, the cohabitants, as to how they will run their day-to-day life and finances whilst they're living together. I think that's very important because if somebody's contributing to a property, that doesn't necessarily give them a right to a share in the property. So, for example, if you're paying rent towards, just having a space in the property that's not the same as paying towards the mortgage, and it's important to be clear about that so that there's not a dispute if parties do separate as to whether it's been mortgage payments or rent or just paying some of the bills. You may also want to have in there about if you do pay for building work, or if, for example, somebody does some of the building work themselves, how that's to be reflected as well. Because one of the things, if you do pay for building work and you enhance the value of the property, that can give rise to a claim. So it's a very complex area. I would suggest that if you do have a cohabitation dispute, that you do come in and speak to one of us about it, because it's all quite case specific about the facts, so that we can give you more pinpointed advice.